School board six.
I was at all the brothers are from there. I was right in.
I won't be I get to it, but
So that's where you're right.
and we are
Just
live.
so I like-
Okay, we are about
I love this.
3 minutes
Driving
early.
and walking and being.
Okay. Committee, I have a quorum and one of my members is in the hall. One is absent, but there are 4 of us, so I think we can start.
Oh, what's the next one?
And what I thought we would do today is a refresher, since I'm not sure we ever got to go over the final version of Act 73. It is not the bill that got voted out of here. A lot of it was negotiated on the floor or in some groups on the floor. And I thought before we started talking about whether or not we needed to amend it, we should know what it is. So I've asked Beth and John, and at this point, I will leave it to you two if you've got a program or.
We've got an act down.
Okay. Your dog and pony show, right?
You're our 4th stop.
It is polished.
Well, depends on how much time you have and how many.
So you've done Ways and Means and 2 Education Committee.
Correct.
All right, we are last on the list. That's normal. Before you start, there is a budgeting workshop at Friday at noon. In, I believe, room 10 or 11, if anyone, House Appropriations, I guess, does this every year, like how the budget does,
yeah.
how it gets developed. And I was told that senators are welcome. So it again is general information. And then the second one about where things. In 2 weeks, I think, is a second workshop on budgeting. So Beth, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel. So I'm going to go over sections 1 through 33, which are generally considered the education policy sections, which were the sections I was responsible for drafting. I have a PowerPoint that summarizes those sections, and I will go at whatever speed you want me to go at and focus on whatever you want me to focus on.
I'm starting to have flashbacks. Looking at this. The committee of conference, which was long and hard. I think just summary of the ed policy that's in it, and then more specifically what financing. looked like. And then
That'll be all John, right? So I'll try and go quickly so that John has more time. Also, Charlotte has also posted for you various different handouts we've done over the last few months on Act 73. So our Act summary, a timeline, some notes, and also a list that I put together for the education policy committees, but I thought you might find helpful, of reports that were due under Act 73, and then hot links to everything that I was able to access. So that's on your website. So would you like me to share my screen? I have a PowerPoint, but I'm also happy to just talk through it, whatever you would like.
Okay,
Sure.
Committee,
If you want to share the PowerPoint, just kind of.
yeah, I mean, sharing it also helps, because if anybody is watching at home, they can see it.
Okay.
So that would be.
So this is a summary. I'm just getting in my little disclaimer here. This is a summary. Not every single detail or concept is on these slides. If there's a concept that you're wondering why I didn't cover it or where is it, it's probably somewhere buried in the Act language itself, and we will find it. But again, this is just a summary. So we're going to go over, I'm responsible for sections 1 through 33. Section 1 was the findings section. I did not cut and paste the findings here. We can flip over to the Act itself if you'd like to look at it. The findings, I think, are important to you all because it lays out your legislative intent roadmap for the work you intend to do this session. Do you want to flip over and look at that, or just know that that is where that intent lives? Okay. Section 2, and I put page numbers so you can find the applicable sections in the act itself.
Okay.
The Commission on the Future of Public Education was section 2. You all refocused the charge of the commission and asked them to report back on you on those 4 bullet points, and I have linked their final findings and recommendations here.
We have done that.
Section 3 created the school district redistricting task force. Again, I didn't cut and paste anything. If you want to dig into any of the enabling language, we can flip over to the act, but just know that it was section 3, pages 18 to 24, and I have linked their final report to it. Section 4 created the school district voting ward working group, which was created to do just what it sounds like it should do, and that is to recommend to you all constitutionally proportional voting wards within new school districts. This group exists. I believe they have met at least twice, and they stand ready to do work whenever.
They have districts to work.
Correct. The one point that I am pointing out everywhere I go is that one of their deliverables to you all is a recommendation regarding school board size, but there's no date by which they need to deliver that recommendation. I think that's largely going to be dependent on how big the school districts are, right? And so if you get to a point where you think that that recommendation will be helpful to you, you're probably going to have to reach out to the Secretary of State office to get that. There's no automatic trigger. Section 6, class size minimums. Section 6 amended the education quality standards statute to establish class size minimums. I'm going to let the class size minimums speak for themselves. Multi-age classrooms were also limited in grades K through 8 to 2 grade levels per classroom. And then there are a bunch of exemptions for class size minimums: pre-K, kindergarten, CTE, flexible pathways, terminal courses, advanced placement courses, specialized equipment courses, driver's ed classes, and small group services for special education or academic intervention or English learner. The state board may grant a waiver if the school is geographically isolated or is working on a compliance plan. And the Secretary of Education, if a school is not meeting class size minimums over 3 consecutive years, then the Secretary may take actions that are allowed when a school is not meeting education quality standards. And so on section 7 provides some guidance on that piece. So under current law, if there is any school that is not meeting any education quality standard, or the students are making insufficient progress in improving student performance, the Secretary is required to provide written notice to the school of the actions or the district that the district must take to come into compliance, and provide technical assistance over 2 years. If after the 2 years the school is still not in compliance, then the Secretary is required to make recommendations to the State Board of Education regarding next steps. And then the State Board of Education would have a final order. And there is a menu of options for the Secretary to recommend. They could continue to provide technical assistance. They could, the state could assume control of the school. There could be supervisory union boundary adjustments, or there could be some sort of consolidation ordered. What Act 7 of Act 73 did is say, if we're here because the school is not meeting class size minimums, and the Secretary it's been those 3 consecutive years, and the Secretary has offered technical assistance for 2 years, and we're still not compliant, the state board is not allowed to order consolidation to cure that if that consolidation is going to result in capital debt. So the state board can't order consolidation if it requires building a wing or building a brand new school, if the school district couldn't pay for that out of a capital reserve account or any other monies they have available, until you all establish new school district boundaries and take further actions regarding what happens if a school fails to meet education quality standards. The class size minimums, I should point out, do not take effect until July 1, 2026. So they're not in effect this year. Section 8 required the State Board of Education to update a bunch of rules. They're going to update the education, and I'm going to leave the dates to speak for themselves. Update the education quality standard rules to reflect the class size minimums that we just walked through, and also statewide graduation requirements. Statewide grad requirements will not take effect until the 27-28 school year. State board's also updating the independent school program approval rules to reflect those class size minimums. And they are reporting to you all with proposed standards for schools to be deemed small by necessity or sparse by necessity. And thanks to Ezra, I have found that report and linked to it on the report, the separate reports document.
Okay, because the Department of Education is coming in to give us an update on Friday. So that will be a good thing to find out if they have that sheet.
Section 9 requires a bunch of reports from, requires AOE to do some things and to give you all a bunch of reports. First thing it requires is that the agency recommend to the state board on or before January 1 of this year, statewide graduation standards. And then the state board in section 8 would be reviewing them and then updating the education quality standards to reflect whatever decisions they make based on those recommendations. I've linked to those recommendations on the report document that Charlotte has posted for you. On or before January 15th of next year, AOE is required to develop and publish a statewide school calendar that would start in the 28-29 school year. And then they had a number of different reports that they were due to you. I'll just let them speak for themselves. And I believe that all of them have been turned into the legislature and are linked on the separate reports document. They came in different reports, not one report. So there's a couple different ones to cover those topics. Section 10 requires the State Board of Education to essentially do a sunset review of all of the rules it is responsible for, to report back to you all on what can we sunset, what rules are no longer needed, what rules do we need to update, what's the plan for updating those rules, and are there any associated costs or staffing needs. That report is not due to you all until December of this year. Sections 12 through 20, I'm just going to say generally, are the state aid school construction program. Sections 12, 13, 16, 17, and 18, and 19, I think 18. Anyway, the program itself does not become effective until July 1, 2026. So it's not effective yet. However, the state aid for school construction program advisory board is up and running. That was effective July 1, 2025. And they do have a report for you all regarding legacy debt consolidation for new school districts.
Is that linked in? Okay.
Not in the slides, but in the separate reports document, yes. Okay, section 21 is the who gets tuition. Section 27 that we'll walk through in a minute is the how much tuition do they get. Section 21 is who gets that tuition. So section 21 amended the statute that governs what types of educational programs or schools the school district is allowed to pay tuition to. This took effect on July 1, 2025, so it is current law, no contingency. So under Act 73 and the changes made to section 828, school districts can pay tuition to public schools located in Vermont, independent schools that meet EQS, a tutorial program approved by the state board, an approved education program, a public school located in another state, therapeutic approved independent school located in Vermont or another country, or an approved independent school that meets these criteria. Do you want to go over the criteria, or would you like for them to speak for themselves?
No, sounds like your voice is.
Oh, this is actually pretty good compared to where I thought I would be. This is what to say. I appreciate that.
So
if you have any questions about that, don't hesitate to let me know.
okay, yeah.
I believe the agency has a list of schools that are eligible to receive public tuition based on this law on their website.
So that would be something to ask.
I'd be curious as to what schools, private schools, independent schools that heretofore have been allowed to receive public funds, who's been cut off. And I think it's just for our information. I think it's important for us to know. And it might be important also to learn what the impact from those schools, what the schools have to say regarding the impact of that.
Section 21 also provides definition for therapeutic approved independent schools. That term did not exist in Title 16 before Act 73. And then section 22 is a tuition transition section that allows students who are enrolled for the so last year or this year in an approved independent school that does not meet those new requirements, they can continue to receive tuition through graduation. Sections 24 through 26 are amendments to the State Board of Education appointing authorities. The State Board was and is made of 10 members. On pre-Act 73, the governor appointed all 10 members. Act 73 changed that. So this is current law. This went into effect this summer. And under the changes here, the governor would appoint 8 members, including the 2 student members. The speaker would appoint 1 member, and the Senate committees would appoint 1 member. And the appointing authority that made the initial appointment would continue to fill any vacancies for that seat. Section 25 is a transition period appointment. So the speaker is going to fill the first vacancy. Committee on committees, the second one, then the governor, and so on. The governor retains removal authority over all board members in section 46. However, the appointing authority that made the initial appointment would fill that vacancy. So if the committee on committee, excuse me, if the governor removed the committee on committees appointee, the committee on committees would appoint the person to fill that vacancy. Section 27. This is the how much tuition section. This should really be more in.
Take a minute.
I'm okay. If I take a minute, I might never come back. Section 27 is a little unfair to discuss before John gets to talk because it relies on the foundation formula, but I have faith that everyone in this room is an expert on the foundation formula, so we're just going to go for it.
We all understand.
So section 27 is the first section that we are talking about today that has a contingent effective date. Section 27 has the same contingent effective date as the foundation formula, and that is July 1, 2028. If new school districts are operational and that cost factor formula report you ordered is received by the General Assembly and you've had an opportunity to enact legislation in consideration of the report. So section 27 is really part of the foundation formula. And basically what the majority of section 27 says is that tuition under the foundation formula is just going to be the base and weights follow the student. So each district is required to pay to the receiving school. So that would be both public and approved independent schools. The base, which is $15,033, and then any weights for each student. So each student has the potential to be traveling with different money, depending on the weights that are applicable to the student. That's for every tuition student. In addition, section 27 also allows receiving schools to charge an additional fee up to 5% of the base, not with weights, just the base, for each student attending the receiving school in grades 9 through 12, but only if the receiving school has received permission from the state board to charge that fee. And the electorate of each school district with at least one student attending the receiving school has approved supplemental district spending for that fee.
How much longer have you got?
Just a minute. It's all I will. I'm trying really hard to get through it. The district was also required to pay the full tuition charge to students attending approved area independent schools that function as approved area CTE. Section 28 is also contingently effective. That is repealing all of the tuition statutes that would be unnecessary under the foundation formula. And section 28 requires the State Board of Education to draft rules for the approval process for the fee. So you can only charge that 5% of the base amount if you receive permission from the state board. State board has to write rules on what that process looks like. And those rules have to include a requirement for schools to demonstrate the fee is necessary to educate the student the fee is being applied to, and the fees will not shift costs elsewhere than the school's budget. Section 29 was a state of special education delivery report from AOE. You have that, I've linked it here. Section 30 was a 3-year strategic plan for the delivery of special education. I've linked that here. Section 31 was a position to AOE to help with that strategic plan. Section 32 that unfortunately got bumped up to section 31, so it looks a little confusing. It was an appropriate 2.8 million appropriation from the general fund to AOE for the enumerated reasons here. And section 33 were 5 limited service pool positions to AOE for education transformation work. I'm done. You all know where to find me if you have questions about anything, please.
This is not really our bailiwick. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I am not going to stay here and cough. I'm
Yeah,
going to
and don't
show myself out.
go rest your voice. Okay, John. What's the? That's the finance. Yes, all right, thank you. Welcome back.
Thank you. John Gray, Office of Legislative Counsel. Let's see if I can a little higher.
It's a little bigger on the screen.
And we are on. So where are we at? Ed Finance begins at section 34. I got the page there. But please don't follow in the act. And where are we in the statutes? We're in Title 16 for the first pieces that we're going to talk about. As you know, we'll jump to Title 32 later, which is one your classic taxation. But for right now, Title 16, Chapter 133, which is where the foundation formula is actually created. Just an overview of the first education finance sections. Got them in this table here. Basically, foundation formula, that's your base weights, some cleanup changes throughout the statutes. Of course, we have to repeal a lot of existing education funding concepts. The creation of a supplemental district spending reserve. We're going to talk about some impacts on Title 16 of the supplemental district spending before we actually get to the supplemental district spending. Hopefully you guys remember, but I'll have slides on that and can talk through the way that that's calculated. A few reports, and then of course, transitionary measures. Beth hinted at this, but the effective dates for the foundation formula rollout, it's all contingently effective July 1, 2028. Those that you see effective on passage, that's your reports, and then one technical thing related to delaying the Ed Fund Advisory Committee's first meeting. Just a reminder, and again, Beth said this, but this is the actual language for the contingency. So that's July 1, 2028. And 2 pieces have to be met. New school districts have assumed responsibility for education of students. And you've received that foundation formula report under section 45A, which is among my sections. So we'll talk about it briefly. And then you guys have had an opportunity to enact legislation in consideration of the report.
John, if I'm remembering.
Mhm.
One of the big issues with the committee of conference is that the bill did away with the weight for secondary high school education.
That comes up in the report requires a recommendation on whether.
Yes, and has that come in?
No, so that report is actually something that JFO is contracting with consultants on, and that will come at the end of this year. It's kind of a wholesale foundation formula examination, weight, space, everything.
Okay.
It's December.
Yep.
December.
December, this is the one. So we're going to start with sections 34 and 35. This is your core foundation formula of base and weights. So section 34, this is amending our set of definitions in Title 16, Chapter 133 to add a base amount. That's your per pupil figure of $15,033. It is adjusted for inflation each year, so this would grow over time, assuming inflation happens, which, well, does any indication, that's probably a fair assumption. Creates the educational opportunity payment. Think about in our current system, right? School districts vote budgets, we fund those budgets across the state. We would be switching from a system that does that to just creating these educational opportunity payments, which are really a mathematical exercise. You take your base amount and you multiply it by school district's weighted long-term membership. That gives you your educational opportunity payment, which will be raised by the new statewide education tax, which supplants the existing locally varying extent rates. So educational opportunity payment is the full payment that a district receives in recognition of the cost of educating its students. And again, it's premised on that base amount. And then, of course, section 34 repeals current education funding concepts. Section 35, I don't have the figures here just because I'm trying to do a high level overview, but this is your pupil weighting section. I've got what it does here, but just to tell you what you're left with or what you would have under Act 73, starting in FY 29, you'd have one grade level weight. That's that pre-K weight. It's a negative pupil weight. I think that's intended to be revisited this year. It's just kind of a holdover, right? It's not something that's addressed. You have an update to the economic disadvantage weight. We have an economic disadvantage weight in existing law, but this slightly tweaks the figure. I think it goes from like 1.02 to 1.03, something like that. We also have an existing law and English language learner weight, but it is a single weight. We also have categorical aid in existing law related to that. What you see in Act 73 is breaking out that EL weight, distinguished by both proficiency levels, so that's tests that are administered to determine proficiency, and also formal education level for students with limited or interrupted formal education. You'll also see shortly later on a set of repeals, including of the census block grant for special education. In tandem with that, you have the creation of special education weights. Those are in 3 categories distinguished by disability cost. So depending on what a child's disability is, you would get a different weight. And then the repeal of existing small school and sparsity weights, those will be replaced, as you'll see shortly, with support grants. Just to remind everyone, the weights themselves would be additive. So a student can pick up all kinds of weights, right? And they would be, multiplied by this 15,033 figure to determine your, essentially the weighted base foundation amount. We next have the support grants for small schools and sparse schools. You can see the figures here, but I think it's probably more important to note just the eligibility conditions. So a small school must have 2 things. One is, an objective numerical check. Does it have fewer than 100 pupils in 2-year average enrollment? And then it has to be annually determined to be small by necessity under standards established by the State Board of Education pursuant to Section 8B. So the wording there is maybe not perfect because I think it's under standards established by the State Board. It's not that the State Board has to do the determination, but that requires an annual determination that you're small by necessity. So it's an annual check. Very similar structure for the sparse schools. You have an objective check. Are you in a city, town, or incorporated village with fewer than 55 persons per square mile? And do you have that annual determination of sparse by necessity? I do want to note the city, town, or incorporated village. You may recall we had discussions last year about the appropriate geographic measure for determining sparsity. There was some debate as to whether zip code was appropriate. Among the measures that show up in the Section 45A report, which is that contingent effective, that's the necessary report for that contingency, is a report on the appropriate, suitable, best sparsity geographic measure. So maybe more to come. We, of course, have repeals. Just going to note, the repeals that show up in Section 42 here and flag a couple that I've already talked about. The census grant, that's repealed for special education because you now have those special education weights. And similarly, you can see the categorical aid for English learners in the top right is repealed. Now you have that broken out EL weight. A couple of other technical repeals as well.
So that Act 173 from 2018.
Yeah.
Does that go away? Because that was a census grant.
I don't know the whole of that act, so it's hard for me to say, but in this particular piece, the whole of 2961, which is that census block grant, is repealed.
Right.
Yeah, if you're doling out dollars based on the
Census block.
Yeah, that's going away.
yeah, it's goes away.
Right. Yep. I just want to make sure I remembered that correctly.
Yeah, that's the strange looking statute that has for these years, you calculate it in this way for this next set of 3-year
Transition.
Yeah.
I think we're in the last year of the transition.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's right. We can jump through this next section quickly, but just so we capture all the sections throughout Act 73. There's a set of conforming changes. This is just updating references to ed spending from ed spending to EOP and supplemental direct spending, cleaning up some outdated language in the stabilization reserve that harkens back to the time of its enactment. It's truly non-substantive. It's just outdated language. And then more substantively, and I think I talked about this before, Section 45C delays the first meeting of the Ed Fund Advisory Committee. It was initially scheduled to meet July 15 of this past year and was bumped out a year in recognition of the dramatic number of changes that happened in this act. While we haven't really talked about supplemental district spending yet, I will talk about that in detail, but just noting that its impacts from Title 32 reach into Title 16 in these ways. So one is the revenues from the supplemental district spending tax need a home, and the home that they have is they flow to the Ed Fund just as statewide education tax revenues do. However, in the right column, you'll see a portion of them, the recaptured portion, will be reserved within the supplemental district spending reserve. And it's used for two purposes. If there's any miscalculations, the recapture can be used to offset those miscalculations. And then maybe more significantly, any remaining recapture could be used to decrease following year statewide education property tax rates. Another huge thing in this section is the way that school budget votes are changed, or the school budgets themselves are changed. Under the existing system, as we know, school districts are voting on the whole of their ed spending, right? So it's the full of their budget. In this case, a school district would no longer vote on the whole of the budget. You're only voting on supplemental district spending. So it's just what a school district would elect to spend above the EOP that it receives for its students, which means some school districts may not pursue a vote at all. The other thing to note about the difference in the way that the budget is going to appear is not only will you see this as a vote on funds above the EOP, it would show the resulting supplemental district spending tax rate that's required to raise those funds. And the thinking is that this is going to have some more certainty than exists in the current budget vote, where it's unclear what the economic impacts of your vote are. So it's hard to connect that vote to how it might hurt your wallet. In this case, it's a more direct mathematical exercise, which we'll come to shortly. We've got a few reports in these sections. So just to note, AOE will be reporting, or already has reported, in the guidelines for minimum transportation to be covered by the transportation reimbursement grant. JFO reporting on inflationary measures and funding for pre-K and early care. And then the Section 45A report is your big report that we've talked about a number of times already. That's the foundation formula report. That's what your contingent effective dates require. And it's going to address some specific pieces, potentially moving away from special education weights to reliance on special education services, updates to any other weights as empirically necessary, examining that sparsity measure, as you noted before, examining the cost of secondary students and whether a weight should accompany that, and then how to account for CTE foundation formula. So all of that to come at the end of this year. I should say that one thing to note about this report is there are specific directives in it to consider the cost impacts of consolidating school districts. Obviously, given the current bluff that's happening in the school district consolidation space, it may be difficult for the contractor to do that kind of analysis. So they will be, in some ways, riding on the decisions that the legislature makes this issue. Lastly, in the first section of the first set of ed finance sections, we have a transition to move school districts off of their current ed spending and onto the EOP. This happens across fiscal years 29 through 32. The way it works, to put it simply, is you just identify the gap. You identify the gap between the district's FY25 ed spending and their FY29 EOP, which again, their EOP is just determined by multiplying that base times the weighted long-term membership. It may look funny to see the FY25 reference here, but I think the discussions that happened last year were trying to prevent the incentive effects of choosing a future year education spending so people could manipulate the transition gap that they receive. Using this gap between a school district's ed spending and its EOP, a yearly adjustment is made to the EOP that they would receive. It's basically prorating across 5 years. So if your school district has ed spending above the EOP that they would receive, you're just moving them down over 5 years toward the EOP that they would receive. And similarly, if the school district is below the EOP that they would receive, you're adjusting them upward from their ed spend and to that EOP. So that by FY33, all school districts are fully transitioned onto their educational opportunity payments.
Wait, can you go back?
Yes.
I think, is it under the reports section? Did you do that yet?
Yes. Yes.
The maybe you said this and I was zoning out, apologies if John, if you were, but on the page 88 through 90, yeah.
Mhm.
Move away from special education weights to a reliance on special education services. What do you mean by that bullet?
So I will say that I don't know fully what the General Assembly intended, but the specific language is to recommend updates to the foundation formula to move off of or away from special education weights. I think the idea is if there's going to be a different method of delivery of special education services, we might have to revisit the way that if either weights are appropriate for that or not, or it could be a manipulation of the weights themselves if you change the method of delivery. So another way to say something that I said earlier, a lot of what the contractor is asked to do, they're going to need information from you guys as to what the approach is within ed policy sections, right?
And as I remember it, the administration was saying that we'll deal with special ed and transportation out there. We're not gonna deal with those costs in this bill.
Which could be one of the ways that you think about this if special education will be dealt with separately. And part of the question of where do costs belong? Do you build them into a foundation formula? Should they come in the form of grant? Like here, Act 73 enacts a change from sparsity, small school weights to census, to grants, support grants for those. So sometimes a question of are grants better, are weights better? How do you think about that?
Special ed is still in the ether, I think.
Well, there are weights for special education.
Yeah.
That's why I don't recall this. I recall
Yeah.
almost everything about this act. But not that specific language. I'm trying to remember when.
That's correct.
Yeah, and I don't remember what the thought on this particular thing was. But
I just remember sitting in a room when the mezzanine drafting it. But I when I read this to put together the presentation, it is interesting to pass an act that immediately enacts ed weights and then tasks someone with revisiting. Although you could also say the whole of this section is asking someone to revisit the entirety of them.
well, this whole section was in order to get the compromise, as you will recall.
No comment. Okay, so just a high level summary of all that we just went through. Foundation formula with a base amount of 15,000 per pupil plus those updated weights.
What year is that? FY 25?
FY 29. So July 1, 2020.
But I mean, at 15,000, was that FY $24?
I
$9?
think it's 25, FY 25, and then inflated from there.
Okay.
Yep. The educational opportunity payments have been created. Again, that's your base times weighted long-term membership. In place of small school and sparsity weights, you now have small school and sparse school support grants. I should say, just a note, unlike the existing structure where some of the characteristics are drawn from the districts as a whole, and you can think this is especially meaningful for sparsity, the determination is made right at a tighter level. So it's really about sparse schools, which sounds funny, but it's a strange term, but it's more about the school characteristic than it is the district characteristic. And then lastly, change to your budget votes is exclusive to your supplemental district spending, and those budget votes would display the required tax rate. So now we're jumping to the education property tax changes. Those begin at section 46. And in the VSA, we are now in Title 32, and we're jumping into Chapter 135, your education property tax. So again, I got another table for these sections. We're going to be talking about supplemental district spending, the imposition of a statewide education tax rate in place of locally varying homestead rates, flow-through changes to the December 1 letter, a homestead rate transition. Additionally, we have the property tax credit repeal and replacement with the new income sensitivity measures, which are made through the homestead exemption, and then just some conforming changes. Similarly, almost all of this is continually effective July 1, 2028. The piece that you see on the left of July 1, 2027, this is your December 1 letter. The reason this comes out first is that you need the recommendation from that letter in advance of the FY 29 roll out, so it becomes effective earlier. And then what you see on the right, the effective on passage, that's our report, so the work is being done on that. Just showing again, contingency language, 2 pieces, new school districts have assumed responsibility for education, and you've received that section 45A report to allow legislation in consideration.
I think as we're going forward, I'd like to do more on the change in the homestead exemption, property tax, income sensitivity,
Okay,
whatever we're calling it, not today.
Yeah.
I think that's really someplace that we didn't. It's on page 98, which sets everybody with homestead, non-homestead, non-residential, and non.
oh, the classifications themselves,
Classification.
Yeah, Kirby will be-
And Kirby can talk, because I'm not gonna hold us here today, Kirby. If that's okay with you.
Are you saying I should go?
No, you can stay.
Yeah, it's like,
But I think that's one I'd like to have us understand. We did a lot of work on that, but I think it might be refreshing to figure out where we landed. I remember a lot of curve graphs and
oh, the homestead exemption,
the whole.
Tax and JFO would pass with
yes.
the amount it comes back with, right?
For the homestead exemption?
Yeah.
There's a specific report, section 53,
Yeah.
tax is reporting by the end of this year on a potential, the way that it left here was people felt okay, but thought maybe you could do better on the curve. And so they taxed with coming back with a report on alternative structure. And one of the directives was consider income sensitivity measures that might extend benefits to a household of up to 175,000 in household income.
Okay, that's
So there's
what
some,
I haven't seen.
it's not until the end of this year, I think.
That's not really helpful. I know the second home, non-homestead, non-residential report is in. And, we will be doing a joint hearing with Ways and Means to have that presented. It's pretty lengthy, but this little paragraph with the 1.0, 1.0.
Yes.
That's
I'll cover that
where
shortly.
you will deal with that because you
Yep.
will change that one to
Yep.
something else.
Yep.
Or you can't.
Yeah, the way, so we're talking about 32 VSA section 5402, which is your education property tax liability section. And, in the switch from locally varying homestead rates to a statewide education tax rate, a uniform statewide education tax rate, the way that different actual rates are assigned is through that table of statutory factors. And so currently it's 1, meaning every kind of property, regardless of classification, receives the same rate. But once you have those recommended statutory factors, depending on what you implement, you could essentially use them as levers to assign liability to different classes of property. So now we're going to jump into the most complicated thing I will describe today, I think. The supplemental district spending, the way that it's calculated. I'm hoping that folks remember a lot of this. There's a relatively simple, I think, intuitive explanation, but I also want to talk about some of the math since this is a committee pretty well equipped to deal with it if you're interested. So section 46, this is the moving away from locally varying, this is adding definitions to Title 32 for your supplemental district spending. So eliminating current funding formula language. What is supplemental district spending? It is the spending that voters of a district may approve above their educational opportunity payment up to a cap of 5% of the district's unweighted foundation amount. So this is 5% not of the weighted, not the EOP. Basically, you can think of it as a unweighted amount. If you took a non-weighted student count and multiplied that by your base, that would give you 5% of that would give you what your cap is. So this is what voters would be voting on. The supplemental district spending tax is imposed uniformly, meaning that everyone has to use the same rate to raise the same amount of funds, but only school districts that are voting supplemental district spending will be paying any supplemental district spending tax, and their rate will just be determined in the way that anyone else's would be. So to raise that supplemental district spending, a district must impose the rate that would be required to raise those funds in the lowest taxing capacity district. I think that's the most intuitive way to think about it. Everyone has to apply the same rate to raise the same amount of funds. And what rate do you apply? You apply the same rate that would be required in the lowest taxing capacity district. The inevitable result is districts are raising more funds than they voted in supplemental district spending. That becomes your recapture.
And that is our Brigham requirements.
That's the equalization measure that's been introduced to try to address the Brigham concerns.
John, was this put in as a permanent thing or was it did we have like a 5-year?
There is a transition to roll out the cap. So in the first 10 years, there's actually the first 9 years, there's a different cap. The first 5 years, you have a 10% cap. And then you go down to 5% by FY 38, I want to say. So the first 5 years, you have 10%, and then you bring it down by 1% each year. But the actual concept of supplemental district spending in Act 73 is permanent. Right? There's nothing in Act 73 that says supplemental district spending is going away and you're going to be entirely on EOP. But we do have a transition mechanism for the cap. So the left side is kind of more intuitive description of supplemental district spending. The right is some of the math, but I think it makes sense with the bottom left bullet, basically. So the way it works is you benchmark rates to the school district with the lowest taxing capacity district, and that is the district that's anticipated to have the lowest grand list per long-term membership in the upcoming fiscal year. Basically, you can think of this as who has the least property wealth per student available.
And that's based on regardless if they do SDS, right?
Exactly,
That's just
exactly.
the lowest over.
The pool for determining that is not related to any vote. It's truly, and this affects the December 1 letter. The Commissioner of Taxes will just look to identify who has the least property wealth per student. That's your school district, the lowest taxing capacity. And the way that it's translated into action is through the supplemental district spending yield. This works differently than the existing yields. But the simple concept that it is, it just identifies how much revenue per long-term membership. So this is just the student count, it's not weighted. How much revenue would be raised in that district at a rate of $1 per $100 for equalized education property value. So how much could be raised at a 1% tax, basically? And if you think about it, what happens is you take your school district's per pupil supplemental district spending, and you just divide that by the yield. And what that tells you is the rate that would be required in the lowest taxing capacity district to raise those funds. When you apply that to your school district's property tax base, unless you are that lowest taxing capacity district, it's going to produce extra revenue, and that is your recapture, like we talked about earlier, that flows into the ed fund, and then is reserved within that supplemental district spending reserve and held to potentially reduce following year statewide property taxes. So here's that transition. I love this one because I don't really have to explain it. You can just look at it and see. That's nice. Go from 10% down to 5% over a 2-year period. You do get that 10% cap for that first transitionary period, in which are also going through a number of other transitions, right? Like moving from ed spending to EOP. And as we'll come to shortly, there's also a homestead rate transition as well. So we got all kinds of transitions in this ad. Yes, okay. Changes to 5402. This is your property tax liability section, and then updates to the December 1 letter. So, the big finance property tax changes here are you're replacing the existing property tax mechanism that fully funds locally voted school budgets and accounts for that variation through varying homestead rates. You're replacing it with just a uniform statewide education tax. This means everyone's getting that same rate in application. Because of the CLA and statewide adjustment, it may look different on bills. There's a uniform statewide education tax rate that's going to be recommended, as you'll see in the December 1 letter. Now, it's still the case that that statewide education tax would be adjusted, and this is what we were talking about earlier, by statutory factors to assign liabilities to different classifications. Kirby will talk about this eventually, but that's your homestead, non-residential, and non-homestead residential. Currently in law in Act 73. Those statutory factors are 1. So effectively, all the classifications are taxed at that statewide education tax rate. But if you think about it, if you had, a statutory factor of 2 for one of them, you would be doubling that uniform statewide education tax rate. Additionally, the amendment to section 5402 imposes that local supplemental district spending tax. It's calculated exactly the way that I just described. You take your district's per pupil supplemental district spending, and you just divide it by the supplemental district spending yield. That tells you the tax rate required to raise those funds. Section 48 amends the December 1 letter. It eliminates the current recommendations for yields because you no longer have those varying homestead rates. And instead you get a statewide education property tax rate to fund spending from the ed fund. And the hope with the December 1 letter, and what I think there's reason for optimism around, is that there would be a bit more certainty to the figures that you receive here. If you think about what you're trying to fund here, you're not anticipating school budgets that haven't been voted on yet, right? You're voting on, the recommendation is just based on a rate to raise the EOPs for all the school districts, which again is a mathematical exercise. Similarly, identification of the supplemental district spending yield is a mathematical exercise. Commissioner of Taxes just identifies what's the lowest taxing capacity district, asks how much they can raise at that $1 per $100 of equalized education property value, and that's your supplemental district spending yield. So more of a mathematical exercise, less of a prediction of what might come months later. Although there could still be variation. And then lastly, some conforming changes to pick up references to the varying rates. I hinted at this, there's a homestead rate transition, really similar structure to what you saw before with the educational opportunity payments and across the same time period. So fiscal years 29 through 32, with everyone fully transitioned in FY33. You identify a transition gap. So in this case, you are determining the difference between the statewide homestead rate, which again is the same rate for everyone. You're determining the difference between that FY29 statewide homestead rate, which is used to fund the EOPs, and the district's prior year homestead rate. Using that gap, which is fixed in time, right? It's not adjusted each year, but using that fixed gap, make an adjustment to the school district's, the statewide homestead rate, and you're basically prorating over the following 5-year period. So if your homestead rate was above the rate required to fund the EOPs, that statewide, the uniform statewide homestead rate, you'd be moved downward. And then similarly, if your homestead rate in FY28 was below what would be required to fund the EOPs, you're moved incrementally upward. But note that it is just an adjustment to that rate. And it's based on a fixed transition gap. Similar to the earlier EOP transition, the gap is meant to be determined based on, gives greater certainty to the Commissioner of Taxes, to the tax department, if you have actual fixed gaps. Switching gears a bit, we have the repeal of the property tax credit and the new income sensitivity measure. So that's implementing the homestead property tax exemption. This is rolled out at the same time based on the same contingencies as the foundation formula. And unlike the tax credit system, where you're taxed on the full value of the property right and you receive a credit against that tax, this actually reduces the tax liability. So the homestead property tax exemption reduces the amount of house site value subject to any education taxes. It's available for households as enacted with household income not more than $115,000. And it provides our scaled range, right? In inverse relation between household income and homestead exemption. So the bottom of the bracket, if you make 0 to 25,000 in household income, you would receive a 95% homestead exemption against the first $425,000 in house site value. Similarly, if you made between 110 and 115,000, you get a 10% homestead exemption against that same house site value. Section 51 just codifies the purpose. I think it's pretty obvious. Reduce tax liability for households with that kind of income. And this is the report we were talking about earlier, section 53. December 15th of this year, tax to report on an alternative homestead exemption structure includes a couple of things, but importantly, what we noted before, an analysis of the implications of moving to income sensitivity that provides benefits to households of up to $175,000 in household income. That's the graphs you were talking about earlier, that kind of curve that you see. You may also remember, I was going to say, you may remember the colored squares and trying to get everyone to be a happy color. I don't know how that works. This would also include recommendations for updates to the homestead declaration.
John, can I ask a question?
Yes.
I don't wanna ask you a policy question, because I know you don't like policy questions, or you don't want to answer them, but.
I can refuse.
This tax policy. Could, I mean, I know it's contingent in this bill on drawing new districts, but it could exist outside of.
Yes.
Thank
Yes.
you.
You can pursue. All of these things are only linked to that by the decisions that you guys made
Right.
to make them contingent.
Right.
There's nothing inherently
Right.
linked
Right.
between the income sensitivity measures and the school district configuration.
Thank you.
Lastly, just to have a boring final set of slides, conforming changes. So any references to the property tax credit are replaced with references to the homestead exemption, trying to extend those benefits in the exact way that they're currently extended under law. And then updating the directives of the Ed Fund Advisory Committee to address that foundation formula rollout and the new homestead exemption. High level overview of what we just did in Title 32. You're replacing, Act 73 replaces locally varying homestead rates with a statewide education tax to be adjusted by those tax classification statutory factors. Imposes a supplemental district spending tax for districts to raise funds locally for any voted supplemental district spending. Using those equalization measures where we benchmark to the lowest tax capacity district. Repeal of the property tax credit system and replacement with the new homestead exemption, which is your new, when people talk about income sensitivity measures, this is what you would be referencing in the future, the homestead exemption. Lastly, I just wanted to note, you can click on this link or it may be posted elsewhere, but we do have an act summary on our website, or the legislative website. That's just a 2-page summary of everything Beth and I and Kirby will talk about basically. And then a fun, beautiful final slide.
Okay.
Thank you. That's what I was looking for. So.
And Kirby, I figured out what happened. You're on the back of the page
Oh, okay.
That was not intentional.
and it just said invited, but I don't think anyone's gonna absorb any more at this point in time. But we've got Julie and Ezra coming in tomorrow, and I think your presentation might work better with them because they're gonna be doing the Ed Fund. We'll be doing all numbers tomorrow. Would it work? Or do you think we need to do it now?
What time was that?
They are in here, at 1:30.
Yeah, I'm booked.
Okay,
If you want, I can give you a very fast overview now. It's
Okay.
12 pages of the bill, really, but I've got.
okay.
I can also say that it more intuitively links with the statutory factors we just talked about than it probably does like the Ed Fund.
Okay. If we can do that. Quickly.
Okay.
And we have all sort of all.
It's been amazing.
But a trip down memory lane.
It sure was. Sure was.
It feels very fresh though.
So good late afternoon, Kirby Keaton, Office of Legislative Counsel. Share my screen to easy momentarily. Okay. So the quick version here, and it can be quick, I think, is I'm going to talk about property tax classifications, and I'm going to talk about the regional assessment districts. I think for your purposes, it's going to be the classifications that you're concerned about. As a refresher, Act 73 created one new tax classification for Vermont. We currently have homestead and non-homestead. Act 73 carved out of non-homestead a subset called non-homestead residential, which was intended to classify second homes and short-term rentals as their own thing. Things that you should be aware of. So really, I mean, that really is the gist of what there's a lot of law here, but it was just to get at that. So for your purposes, what you should be aware of is one, there's a definition from Act 73 non-homestead residential. It says it's a parcel or portion of a parcel for which a homestead was not declared and that has a residential property as defined by the commissioner by rule. So I think the chair mentioned earlier that there was a lot of discussion and a lot of negotiation. This is what you landed on. It's basically you could say it's punting to the Department of Taxes to figure out the nitty-gritty of the definition. The department has weighed in, as I think the chair mentioned earlier too, that this section 61B of this required the department to issue a report by December 15, 2025. They did so. I think the report's great. Part of that report is recommendations for factors that John was talking about. That gives you some background information such as Act 73 required them to do, to recommend a multiplier that would ensure that any new revenue derived from the new classification would cover the cost of the education fund caused by the homestead exemption that John was talking about. And it also required that they put in their report multipliers that would ensure any new revenue derived from the non-homestead residential classification would mitigate forecasted property tax increases. There's a lot of caveats because there's a lot of unknown information about what things are going to look like in a couple of years when all of this would become law. But given those restrictions that they were dealing with, those limitations, they did their best. I was aware that Ways and Means was hearing from the department next Tuesday afternoon, but it sounds like that it will be a joint.
We're doing a joint planning tomorrow, and the chair of Ways and Means is going to join us, so.
Okay.
I think we have,
I think it makes
that's
sense.
one that I definitely would like
Yeah.
us to all hear the same. There are some recommendations or things we need to do to move this forward. It will require significant amount of work perhaps from your local listers, which depending on the qualifications of your local listers and whether or not they're employed or volunteer, we'll hear from the Listers Association. But I think we may find that there will be a request for additional funding to do this. I wouldn't be surprised. We do pay a per parcel fee now to keep the grand list updated, but this will be a big update.
Yeah, and so I'm sure that the department will also next Tuesday go into that. To give you a heads up, they're definitely going to talk about the definitions, and they're going to want some further changes for narrowing some of these things down, such as focusing on defining a dwelling. They don't want to have to leave everything up to their judgment. I think they would like some additional clarification in the law this session. So I think that's something that they'll talk about.
Yeah.
Just as a reminder, classifications are part of the contingency provisions and the effective dates, as in it's tied to setting up new districts. I've mentioned that before. I just want to let you know classifications is also part of that. In addition, though, to that contingency, the classifications have their own specific contingency, which is that these will not take effect unless by July 1, 2028, the legislature creates a new tax rate multiplier to be used for these. As John mentioned, the current draft of Act 73 as it's enacted has a factor of 1 for every classification type, which means that there's no difference. But because folks were aware that these aren't being created to do nothing with.
Really?
Let's before July 1st, 2028, decide what you want to do with that. But, that's still well in the future. And you'll be talking about it next Tuesday. It's a big part of what you're talking about. So I think those are the big things to make you fully aware of classifications. Another reminder is that part of this was the regional assessment districts, just as a refresher.
That's right.
This is a little later timeline than other things. By January 1st, 2029, Act 73 would have Vermont transitioning over to having mass reappraisals done on basically a county level. Currently, every municipality is on the hook to do that for themselves. And there's testimony last year of how some of them struggle. And this has been something there was Act 86 from a few years ago related to this. This is just part of something that the General Assembly has been working on for a while. And it's also part of this. By next Thursday, you should get another report from the Department of Taxes about this topic. It's due July 15 or January 15, sorry.
And we were, I remember discussing the importance of making sure that these assessment districts coincided with whatever school district we set up, so that you wouldn't have half your district being reappraised at different times from the other.
There was talk of that, but the language in here currently has it based on counties.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just scanning the language quickly and I know my eyes are picking it up, but was there language specifically about appeals, appraisal appeals and how those, or was that something that we asked the working group to talk about?
Exactly, the working group. It's right here. The working group report that you'll receive next week deals with these four things, plus, the fourth one is whatever else PBR wants to include. But the appeals is one of the number two there.
Okay, that's good. And this report is coming to us next week. Okay, that's good. I have a constituent who has might want to testify about her experience with an appeal.
And it doesn't
kind of interesting.
relate to this. It related to the tax sale bill. And we set a limit that we set what you had to owe before you could go to tax sale. There's a number.
Right.
Apparently one of my towns has this. It was set up as a development, but it has these tiny lots and the taxes are only like $50 a year. And to reach that, I've asked property valuation to have us.
Are they trying to do a tax sale on it?
They're individual lots and they were sold like 50 years ago, and it's like they don't know who owns them. Sometimes they aren't getting any taxes. But at some point, I think I'm going to be looking for a vehicle to fix this. There may be other places that did something similar. This was, as far as I know, it's Warren. And
interesting. Yeah, I think that's not related to
it
this.
is not related to this, but
yeah,
I will be looking for a place to hang it.
What this does relate to is property valuation appeals.
Yeah.
And if you don't like the value that was designed, then
Right. And that's what I have a constituent who has an interesting story, but I want to hear the report first before asking you to come in.
A lot of the focus in this report is on who has authority. Should the state be more involved or less involved? That's what a lot of it's about, and including with the appeals. So those are the big things. If you'd like, I can briefly show you the contingency language since the effective dates are right here. So as a refresher about all of this, uh, subsection F of the effective date section says that the following section shall take effect on July 1, 2028, provided that the new school districts contemplated by this act have assumed responsibility for the education of all resident students, and that the expert tasked with developing a cost factor foundation formula has provided to the General Assembly the report pursuant to section 45A to provide the General Assembly an opportunity to enact legislation in consideration of the report. And these were all the sections of Act 73 that are contingent on that. And I think you heard from John and Beth about a lot of this. And the last one is the property tax classification. So
So essentially, according to this bill, if we wanted to go ahead with new property tax classifications, or if we wanted to move ahead with the new homestead exemption proposal, we can't do that until the new school districts are in place.
Not necessarily.
Well, there is always the word notwithstanding, but
That just changed that.
we'd have to change things.
All we would have to do is get rid of the language that says that we can't do it.
Right, it would be
Yeah.
a notwithstanding, but apparently the
I don't even
governor
think it would be a
doesn't want us to do that.
I don't think it would be a notwithstanding. I think it would just be a delete. I'm not a drafter.
Have the bill stand.
I think we'd be able to figure it out.
As the bill
Repeal the-
stands right now, everything is hinged on the foundation formula, the new homestead
We can
exemption.
unhinge it. We have the power.
And so, once they figure out what it is, it will be our job to figure out how to pay for it. Which is all these sections that John and Kirby just went over. I don't know what the Ed committee is thinking. I'm going to meet with the chair, I think this week, just to see what he is thinking about doing. And that may, and I have no idea what the House and committee is thinking about doing. But we can, I think, take the time to look more deeply into some of these issues. The biggest one we ran into last year, if you remember, was to do we have the transitions, but I don't think. Remember last year that broke out the impact of the tax rates if we just went to the per pupil spending, and it caused mass panic. Either the low spending towns would see their tax rates go up, and the high spending towns would see their tax rates go down, but so would their student spending, and they weren't, that would have impacts on their education program. So if we want to talk about a foundation formula, apart from the redistricting, there seems to be some debate over whether larger districts would save money, and I can't remember being given any information because things were pretty much being written as they were being presented about is the savings in the districts, is the savings in consolidating schools, is it a combination? Where is that savings located? And then who makes that decision and under what circumstances? I think if we went to the foundation formula, schools would find themselves having to make decisions that they may not want to make now, but they can export the cost of. And we have brought down that spending for the last, this will be the third year, which means nobody has really felt the full consequences of their vote.
Yep.
So we have been cushioning people, but I think we are not going to be able to do that next year. might this year, but there are other things that we aren't doing. Okay,
Can I just say one thing?
sure.
I think you bring up a really good question, is where are the cost savings?
Yeah.
It's.
We never had
clear
time
where
to
the
do
cost
that
savings
last
are.
year.
I think 15 superintendent's office costs less to operate than teachers.
Well, we
Say you.
we will have,
You need adults to educate kids.
yes, it is not in teachers.
But the people that teach, not the superintendent office.
Yeah.
They're all part and
So-
parcel of the system.
We will have the pro tem's proposal will be sent to us tomorrow. And we will, John Graham, John is gonna have the privilege of walking through that with us. And then the school boards have already been in for their representative to see me, so my intention is that we will have the school boards, superintendents, whoever we need in. I'm sure the NEA will want to talk to us about that, about their concerns about that proposal. I'm going to ask the Department of Education to talk to us. I wish we could get numbers, but
Yeah, JFO, they gotta be.
JFO, well-
Numbers.
JFO is gonna come in. They're still working with a consultant on some of these things. I'm more interested in how many teachers have already been laid off. I mean, Barry is laying off 2 in this year's budget.
Yeah.
They're being, and that may or may not be the wisest decision from an educational point of view, if it's being driven solely by the ability to pass a budget. And it's, things are not good now.
We,
For
can
anybody.
I just say that, we co-located a lot of that data on the redistricting webpage, because that was one of the things that we looked into, and there are fewer teachers, there are more support staff, but fewer teachers every year.
Did you break it out in how much is that as mental health support staff?
We broke that out.
But we are going to need, I mean, I don't know what Senator Bruce, but we are gonna need JFO to tell us, like.
Oh, yeah.
If we did this, how much less money would we spend compared to,
And I'm
Okay.
sure that we're going to hear that they don't control health insurance. This is for 2 years, I think.
yeah, but we just need to like have somebody quantify what
Yeah.
the number is.
But if you have a labor contract that says your labor's going up 5% next year, and your health insurance goes up 10% next year,
How many people are even given to?
yes, I
Yeah.
mean, how, that leaves no place to take it out of, yeah, except education.
Well, staffing.
Yeah.
It's a true level of staffing,
Yeah.
where you gotta go.
So, I told him we would give it a fair hearing. He has said he thinks we need to do something to say that we are trying to do something real. I would like to know if the Department of Education knows how many schools actually came up against or made decisions based on they would come up against the excess spending threshold for last year. Was that effective? I don't know if anyone knows that at this point. I know it was an issue locally with school budgeting that they were about to hit, and they have recommended the closure through elementary schools.
Well, it was also an issue with districts that desperately need to upgrade their facilities, and they
Oh.
can't because they're bumping up against the excess spending threshold.
Right.
And so they're stuck.
Yeah.
And that's happening down in the Windsor area
I don't know,
as we speak.
I haven't heard of a school yet that doesn't have a leaky roof and can't pass a bond to fix it.
Some are worse than others, but yeah.
Yeah. yeah, I think some of them don't have buckets under in the classrooms yet, but it is. We got money to upgrade the HVAC systems in COVID.
Yeah.
But if the roof's leaking on the HVAC, you're gonna start growing mold, so. We do need to come up with. Some
Yeah.
school maintenance, not necessarily construction, but
Yeah.
major maintenance.
Or decouple it from education spending somehow.
See if we could, that might be a
An
way.
interesting idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
Would you like to go offline?
I think we can go off live.